Good evening. Good to see everybody. We appreciate so much the invitation tonight to be with you. We've known Greg and Karen for a long time, and we stopped in last week to see them and found a host of friends that we didn't know were over here. And then on top of that, you know, here it is the next week I'm here talking to you. So, but we do appreciate it. Start tonight's lesson. I want to tell you a little background story. Back in January, I decided after 45 years of working, and we were talking about this a while ago, decided to retire. And I spent 45 years managing different companies and plants and things like that. And so I was up in Kansas running a couple of plastic plants, and about the time we started hearing things around something called COVID and coronavirus and all that. And I had people come in my office one day and they go, "What are we going to do?" You know, I said, "What do you mean?" They go, "Well, all the plants around us, they're shutting down, they're closing, they're sending people home. What are we going to do?" And I go, "Well, I don't really know." You know, so I called my boss out in California. I said, "What are we going to do?" And he said, give me a minute. And a little while later, he called me back and he said, "We're going to stay open. We've been designated as essential and critical, and so we're not getting to shut down. We have to still be producing." He said, "So you've got to make sure that nobody gets sick." Now, we had about 500-600 employees, and I'm thinking, how in the world can I keep all these people from not getting sick? So we were set about to do the normal things that everybody was doing: masks, distancing. We changed our workstations where people were not close to each other. We changed our schedules. We took temperatures. We did all of those things. And over the period of time, we were pretty lucky. We only had about a handful of people that were infected with it, and they were all mild cases. We didn't have to send people home. Some of our sister plants were sending hundreds of people home, had deaths and all those kinds of things. Well, the reason I want to tell you that is because it has to go along with when I called the health department, I said, give me some advice. And they go, "Well, take this very serious because it is extremely contagious. We're not even really sure how it's transmitted yet, but it's contagious. And if one person gets it, you can count on probably all the people around them getting it." Well, that's scary. What should we do? And you know, that's not anything that we haven't dealt with before. Contagious diseases have been around forever. You know, think back. They used to be worried about smallpox and anthrax and mumps and measles and all those kinds of things that people would get. But when we get to our time right now, we're of course afraid of this COVID thing, and so we have things about quarantine and all that. And now we have a vaccine that seems to be somewhat effective. And the vaccines have been around for a long time, you know, cured polio as such, and all those kinds of things. And we've had countless diseases forever. 1300s, the Black Plague wiped out, a third of Europe, and those kinds of things. So what's that got to do with us? Well, here's what I want us to talk about. This word contagious. Something that is caught. Something that is communicated from one person to another. Something that we can give to somebody else. Now, when it comes to disease, we try to stop it. You said your job is to prevent people from getting it. But there's some things we want people to get. There's some things we want people to catch. There's some things we want for what we have to give it to somebody else. And that, of course, is our Christianity. If you think about contagious things, think about crazes and fads and fashion and speech and those kinds of things. We were talking today at lunch, how that when I was growing up, if you had blue jeans and you had to put a patch on the hole, you were ashamed to go to school. But now they buy them with the holes already in them. That's the craze. That's the fad. you know. And it's catching because somebody sees someone with it, oh, I want one just like it. Those kinds of things. I used to drive this little sporty Mustang. Debbie saw it, she just had to go buy a Camaro. You know, because she saw that. Well, when we think about those kinds of things, we want them to be that way. Think about sports. Why do you think they have cheerleaders? It's so that we get enthusiastic. When we get about politics, sometimes we get a little over the top about politics, but you know, it's something that catches from one person to another. Think about evil. How that it can be passed from one person to the next. In Acts chapter 14, Luke talking there said, the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and made their minds evil and affected against the brethren. See, he said they poisoned their minds. And it went from one person to the next person. 1 Corinthians 5, Paul says not to keep company with the wicked person and put him away. He knew the influence that one evil person would have on others, that it could be caught from someone else. In 1 Corinthians 15, do not be deceived. Evil companionships corrupt good morals. Again, that connection from one person to the next. But then there's positive things. You ever seen somebody that was laughing, you didn't even know what they were laughing about, but you saw them laughing and then pretty soon you're laughing too. You know, somebody looks at you and smiles and you just sit there and frown at them. Normally you smile back. You know, good example. We see someone do something good, we want to do something good as well. Those are positive things and they're easily spread. So tonight, here's what we want to talk about. Contagious Christianity. How contagious are you when it comes to Christianity? You know, we want to really look at the example of the early church in the book of Acts to think about them for just a little bit. It said they had all things in common. You know, they sold their possessions. They helped the needy there in chapter 2. Chapter 4, we see the apostles going about preaching the word everywhere that they could. In chapter 5, it says they ceased not to teach from house to house. They were spreading the good news about Christ. Even under persecution. In chapter 8, it says they were scattered abroad, but yet everywhere they went, they preached the good news of Christ. And even when the rulers tried to stop them, tried to keep them from the people, they still found a way to preach that gospel as Christ had commanded them to do. Paul's journeys, as he went everywhere, you know, and we look at his missionary journeys there in the book of Acts, he wasn't just out on a tourist trip. He was establishing churches. He was meeting people face to face, one at a time. He was spreading that gospel. And we have records of their conversions. We have numbers like 3,000 and 5,000. In Colossians 3:23, it said the word was preached to every creature under heaven. See, that's the way we become contagious. That's the way it spread. The lesson from that is that we can see that we can do what they did. The gospel can come from us. It can be spread from us. It can be caught from us. So that's the application. So we got two questions we want to deal with. First one is, how severe a case do you have? I said a while ago we had 5 or 6 cases there in the plant that I was at, and they were all pretty mild cases. We've had people that didn't even know they were sick until they got tested for some other reason, found out they had it. Those kinds of things. But you know, we start hearing terms like super spreaders. That's what we ought to be. And the second question we want to answer is, how much exposing are you doing? On an individual basis, how much exposing of Christianity are you doing to those around you? Can they catch it from you? Well, let's deal with the first question. It all depends upon your degree of commitment to Christ. Now, how severe a case do you have? The more you're committed to Christ, the more severe case of Christianity you have. And Christ said, you know, he demanded, he said, you take up your cross, you deny yourself, and you follow me. That's the degree of commitment he wants. You know, not anything under 100%. He didn't say, take up your cross and follow me partially. Come part of the way. Take up part of the cross. Deny part of yourself. He said, I want it all. I want every bit of it. Now, he demanded that. 99% is not good enough. Look at some different ways that people are committed. How about some people that are just halfway committed? 50%, we'll say. Think about Lot's wife. She was always looking back, remember? Demas, Paul said he loved the world more than he loved anything else. Now, people who are reluctant to serve the Lord, they're overcome with their own cares, they're overcome with their own self, and so they don't become very contagious. People don't see Christ in them. They have a very mild case. They want their own personal interest, their own tradition. That's what he condemned the Jews for. That they would look at things and say, I want it my way. And if it's not my way, I'm going home. I'm not playing. Well, that's the way a lot of Christians are. If I don't get my way, then I'm not committed to Christ anymore. You know, it's fine as long as things run the way I want it, but when it's different, I don't get what I want, then I'm out of here. And some people are just verbally committed. They talk a good fight. But when it comes down to the actual fight, they're not there. You know, Paul said he had fought the good fight. Think about Peter. Peter was the one who said, Lord, I won't deny you. Lord, they can do whatever they want to me, but I'm going to stick with you. I'm behind you. And yet when it got rough, Peter said, I don't know who he is. See, we see his level of commitment at that point. It was only verbal. Christ condemned those Jews who only paid him lip service. He said their hearts are far from him. See, when we're committed, our hearts are with Christ. Our hearts are always attuned to him, and he knows our hearts. Then there's those who are committed only when it's convenient. You know, when it's easy. When I'm ready. Felix said, Paul, you know, when I have a more convenient season, I'll call on you. I'll let you know. Well, that's the way a lot of people are. You know, just let me get this done. Let me get this over with. Let me do these things. And when it's easy, then I'll decide to follow you. Remember the disciple who wanted Matthew 8, who said, I want to go bury my father. Christ says the dead can take care of that. They'll bury the dead. See, only when it's easy. And then there are those who are committed to people other than Christ. Maybe it's to preachers, maybe it's to friends. You know, if their friends go there, we'll go there. If their friends quit, we quit. If the preacher leaves, I'm leaving. Those kinds of things. Well, that's not Christianity. You're not following Christ, you're following someone else. See, what should our commitment be? Well, it should be first and foremost and only to Christ the Lord. He is our Lord. And so our commitment is not to anything else, but strictly to him, to that person. He's committed to us. He's our Savior. He was willing to die for us on the cross. He tells us how much he loves us so that we can have eternal life, the sacrifice he made for us. And so when we think about those things, that's where our commitment starts. Committed to him and him alone. And sort of like what we just talked about, it needs to be total. Totally committed to him. We're sold out for him. It's not nominal, it's not name only, it's not half-hearted, it's not unreal, it's not so-called, it's true commitment. Paul said, it's no longer I who live, but it's Christ that lives in me. See, that's commitment. And that's what Christ demands of us. We sing a song that says that. Yet 'tis not I. Christ lives in me. Buried with him. And it's not on our own terms. You know, you ever seen people who negotiate with God? You know, when times are tough, things aren't right, they need something, Now, God, if you'll get me out of this situation, then I'll start doing what you want me to do. God, if you'll take care of this problem I have, then I'll be committed. Then I'll really truly follow you. Well, Christ said, if you love me, you keep my commandments. He said in the Sermon on the Mount, if you're wise, you do the things, you do the will of the Father. See, it's not on our terms. We have no excuse for not being totally committed. You know, if we are committed, it's evidenced in our lives. And if we're not committed, it's evidenced in our lives. People can see it. People know. When it's 5 o'clock on Sunday night and we're out doing something other than being here in this building, people see that. I wonder why he's not at services. He must not take that very seriously. See, people know. People watch. So we have to make sure about that. You know, if we're committed, there's no question. There's no question when it comes to time to go to service. We don't have to make a decision every time. Well, do I go today or not? It's automatic. We already know that we're going to be there. You know, we're going to attend worship. Are we going to study? We already know. If we're committed, we're going to study. We're going to learn. We're going to try to grow. We're going to serve others. We're going to give as we should. We're going to do the things that shows that we have the right attitude, the right level of commitment to Christ and His church. And people can see that. They're going to see our joy, they're going to see our peace, they're going to see our happiness. You know, they're going to see the kingdom being priority one. They're going to see that Christ-like attitude that we develop. And how that we go about our daily life every day, doing what He wants us to do. You know, they're going to see how we associate with people. Are we truly their friends? Are we truly trying to get them to heaven? Are we wanting to help them? You know, if we're committed, we become better neighbors. We become better friends. We become better parents. We become better children. We become better citizens. We become better people. And that's what He expects of us. And He says if we focus on that, this life of commitment, this life of Christianity, true Christianity that we're committed to, He said that assures us of a crown of righteousness. If we're faithful to death, so we get that crown of righteousness. Let's look at Romans chapter 6 and verse 16. There Paul says, do you not know to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey? You are that one slaves whom you obey, whether of sin leading to death or of obedience leading to righteousness. But God be thanked, that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which you were delivered. And having been set free from sin, you became the slaves of righteousness. Now we're still slaves. That didn't change. What changed is the master. What changed is who we're slaves to. He said at one time, you were slaves to sin because you were obedient to sin. And that was headed to death, spiritual death. You were going to die in your sins. And yet here comes Christ, and He says, God be thanked because you obeyed. Well, if we went through that obedience, if we tried very hard to obey it, at one time in our mind we knew we needed to obey Christ, why later on would we decide not to be committed to Him? Why later on would we decide that I don't have to have that same enthusiasm I had when I became a Christian? I don't have to have that same desire to serve Him that I used to. He said, look, you are now slaves of righteousness. See, the only way to achieve this type of commitment is to die unto sin. Is to change the master. And once we do that, once we're following the teachings of Christ, dedicated ourselves to that, our friends and neighbors should be able to see it. And they should be seeing it to the point that they say, I want to be like that. I want to be like Him. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. I want to be like Him. Now, some of you probably aren't old enough to know who I'm talking about, but when I was growing up, my hero in baseball was a guy named Reggie Jackson. Now, he was sort of a jerk, but he was a great hitter. And I used to try to bat like, stand like he did and look like he did. Only problem was he was left-handed, but I still tried to look like he did. And, my feet were placed where he put his feet, and I held the bat like he did. And I never could hit it past the pitcher's mound. But why did I do that? Because he was someone I looked up to. He was someone I wanted to be like. Well, if we want to be like Christ, we will be. And then our friends and neighbors can see Christ in us, and they'll want to be the same way. So that brings us to the next question. How much exposing are you doing? We're doing everything to prevent the spread of this virus. But when it comes to Christianity, we do the things to have people catch it. We want people to get it. We want them to be infected with it. So how much exposing are you doing? Can people tell the difference in you? Can they sort of see that before and after picture? And say, he's not the same person he used to be. He's better now. Is there that outward evidence of the disease? Roxanne and I flew up to North Dakota last week, or a week before last. And everywhere we went up there, you had to stick your head in front of a little thing that took your temperature. And I thought, that's the dumbest thing in the world. Especially for a guy that was sort of tall like me, because I kept having to back up and scoot up before they could finally get my temperature. And then they would say, oh, you're good. Well, what were they looking for? Evidence. They were looking for some evidence. Well, when it comes to Christianity, people are looking at us for evidence. And the evidence they're looking for is our good works. The evidence they're looking for, are we following Christ? So the question is, what kind of influence do we have? Everybody has influence. I don't care who you are, you can't escape that. Even after we die, we still influence people. So we have that personal influence. So the question is, can they see Christ in us? Is it visible? The people see you and say, there goes a Christian. Not because you're carrying a sign, not because you got a cross around your neck, not because you're carrying a Bible with you all the time. Can they see by your life, is there outward evidence that you have the disease of Christianity? Can they see Christ in you? We're told to let our light shine, remember? Don't put it under the bushel. Don't hide it under a basket. Let it shine. Let them see your good works so that they glorify God. So we are always visible. Paul told Timothy, he said, be an example of the believers in speech, in manner of life, in charity, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. We're to be the same kind of example. Same way. We need to practice the fruits of the Spirit. We need to develop those fruits. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness, temperance. Galatians 5:22. He said, against those things there's no law. If we practice those things, they become contagious. People like those things. And so they start to see us. On the other hand, are we hypocritical in our lives? And that meaning, remember, is someone who's got a mask and changes their voice from what they really are. Many Christians today are wearing masks, and I'm not talking about face covers. I'm not talking about these blue masks we all been wearing for a while. I'm talking about a mask to hide who we are. A mask to let people not sure who we are. At certain places and certain times, we become someone other than Christ would have us to be. And people can see that. And when we do that, there went the contagious part of it. It's gone. When people see our hypocritical lives, they are not going to want to follow Christ. We've lost that. We're only play acting in Christianity. I had a young man, a supervisor in our plant there, and been working with him a little bit. His family attended church there in town. He had not become a Christian. We was working with him a little bit, getting somewhere with him, I thought. And then one Sunday he didn't show up. None of the family showed up. So I asked one of the other guys, I said, where's that family? Oh, they went to the gun show this morning. There's a gun show in Tulsa. They all packed up and went to the gun show. Now, what kind of example did the Christians in that family have on this young man that we were trying to teach the gospel? See, we had to be very careful. We can cause others to stay away when our job is to get others in. When we're trying to get close enough for this virus of Christianity to become part of them too. You know, Paul said, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Fulfill my joy in being like-minded. Have the mind of Christ. And that's what we all need to do. Simply have that mind of Christ. You know, we'll sum up with this. This is a personal responsibility. I can only infect the people I come in contact with. Greg talked about contacts last week. I can only infect the people I come in contact with. You can only infect the people you come in contact with. And you know who those people are. So you have that personal responsibility to be contagious, to share Christ, to share the good news, to tell them the story of his death, burial, and resurrection. So you have to stay separated from the world. You know, you have to act like someone who's been called out of it and not part of it. You have to tell them directly and indirectly, whether by teaching them directly or by them watching your life, your manner of life, about Christianity. And there's no excuses for not doing that. Christ is not going to accept our excuses. Well, I didn't think I knew enough. Well, I didn't think they would accept it. Well, I didn't think they want to hear it. No. It says our job is to go into all the world and preach the gospel. Not be ashamed of it. Stand for what's right. Preach the good news. Let them know what Christ has done for us. That God is for us. He said, if he's for us, who can be against us? So he's on our side. But he's not going to be unless we start doing what he asks us to do. We're going to be held accountable for our talents and for our opportunities. Several years ago, our youngest son, was playing baseball. And some of you may know Wendell Ingram. Wendell preaches for the church up in Wapanucka, Oklahoma. And Wendell had a son that was the same age as our son, and they were playing on opposite teams in this baseball tournament on a Saturday night. And it rained, and the tournament was supposed to be being played on 2 fields, and because of the rain, only 1 field was available. So instead of being over at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, we played all night long, this tournament. 3 o'clock in the morning, these boys are out there playing baseball. Finally, it was settled down to 2 teams to play for the championship, for the trophy. It was 7:30 in the morning, and they said, we're going to wait 30 minutes, let these kids rest a little bit. We're going to start about 8:30, play the final game, and it'll be over with. Wendell's son was scheduled to pitch for his team. Our son was going to pitch for our team. And I'm thinking, well, what are we going to do? Church starts in an hour and a half, and we're an hour from home. And Wendell walked out to the coach's little meeting, and he said, Coach, I'm sorry, but I'm taking my son and these 2 other boys that go to church with us, and we're not going to play. And this coach just went ballistic. He couldn't believe it. He says, if you take them, I don't have enough players, I'm going to have to forfeit, and they're going to win. Wendell said, I'm sorry. You know, I teach my boys, and these boys, that God comes first. And he took his boys and walked off the field into the tournament. My son got the trophy, got to go to church too. But anyway, what was the lesson? What do you think those other parents thought? Some of them thought he was nuts, but several of them said, man, that's all right. That's a man who's doing what's right. See, people watch us. People look for us. When we have opportunity, we should be doing things that exude Christianity. Exude means it's going in all directions. So let me ask you tonight, are you living the kind of life that's contagious to others when it comes to Christ? You know, do they see the pattern of Christ in you? Do they want to do what you're doing? Do they see your good works? Are they glorifying God because of you? Or are you putting that candle under a basket? Are you hiding it? Are you not letting your light shine? You know, Paul told Titus, he said, show yourself a pattern of good works. When we do that, people will get infected. People will get it. So tonight, think about that. Think about your own responsibility. Think about how you've got this week coming up, what you can do to infect somebody with the gospel. That's our lesson. Tonight, if you need to answer the invitation, whether to become a Christian or if you need the prayers of this good congregation, we invite you to come as we stand, as we sing.